Well, hello, folks out there in YouTube land. This will be interesting. Josh Pate goes after Saban, and actually, I think Saban's right about this. He's talking about the playoff, and of course, Josh Pate, we'll get into all this.
All we do is take the teams that win the most games at the end of the year and put them in the playoffs. But do you really get the best teams? You know, when they told me that we would be favored against 3 out of the 4 teams that got in the playoffs, I'm like, well, why aren't we in the playoff?
All right, so that's basically what Saban said. It's not unreasonable, and here's why. You're going to wind up with teams getting in the playoff that have no business in it because they're in an extremely easy conference, like the Big 12, the ACC, something along those lines on the West Coast in that crappy league. And it's just it becomes, oh, well, you know, they had one more win than you did or one less loss. And you're going, yeah, because they didn't play anybody. They played a bunch of scrubs, and we had to play LSU and Florida and Tennessee and Georgia and Alabama, you know, real tough teams that'll absolutely knock you upside the head. These other teams, they play tiddlywinks. So I'm not going to disagree with him on that. There's a lot of truth to it. It's one of the reasons why I'm thrilled with the 12-team playoff, because a lot of teams that deserve to get in will actually get in. And the ones that don't deserve to get in, they'll get pushed out quickly. And here's where Josh Pate disagrees with Nick Saban, because Josh Pate is very much old school. He only wants 2 teams to play, ever, for a college football playoff. That's his idea of a playoff. Is 2. He'd probably rather go back to where it's just voters decide.
Are we hypersensitive to Nick Saban's comments because of Bama underperforming? I feel like he's always been outspoken. So what Daniel's talking about is Nick Saban's had a lot to say about a lot of things lately. Most recently, Nick Saban has talked about NIL, and he talked about the possible unionization of college football, and that was at the SEC spring meetings, and we already talked about that. Well, then, lately, Nick Saban went on Joel Klatt's pod, and he said, hey, I'm not necessarily crazy with the playoff selection process right now. And I'm paraphrasing him. We're adding OU and Texas, so any given year you could play like 7 top 20 teams or top 25 teams, but then at the end of the season, all people care about is your record. A la you are what your record says you are guy, who we think is a liar sometimes in the world of college football. So anyway, Saban came off as whiny and complainy, according to some, when they listened to that soundbite. I took the rare stance that I actually agreed with you guys. Nick Saban's got the wrong approach on the playoff, because he went on to say last year when they told me we would be favored against 3 of the 4 teams in the playoff, I thought to myself, why aren't we in the playoff? Well, Coach, respectfully, because point spreads aren't how we determine the playoff field.
And here you go, folks. Look right here. Look who got put out. Do you think TCU deserved to be in there at 12-1? They didn't play much of anybody. And then you had other teams that possibly could have. That's why having the 12 teams is going to be so much better. And this is going to happen from time to time until we get to that, which will be 2024, is that you're going to have a team sneak in, and then they wind up playing Georgia, and it's an absolute dumpster fire. It wasn't a fun game to watch. They beat them by 1,065-7 or some ridiculous thing, because they just shouldn't have been in there. They just shouldn't have been. Alabama would have at least given them a good game. Tennessee would have given them a good game, especially in a neutral site. So at least something could have happened there. Instead, we wind up with TCU 65-7 or whatever the crap it was, with Stetson Bennett going around waving at the crowd while they put him on a float in the 3rd quarter. That was the most ridiculous thing I'd ever seen. Literally, he did his little march around the stadium in the 3rd quarter. That's a real tough game.
I had some of you come at me yesterday and say, how are you, of all people, calling out Nick Saban? How are you, of all people, the guy who sits there and says you are not what your record says you are, the guy who trumpets a more accurate strength of schedule metric in college football, how are you calling Nick Saban out when he's making your point? Well, he's not making my point. He's close to making my point, but he did not make my point. So let me give you my point.
You said the secret word!
My point has been for a long time, I don't just believe you are what your record says you are. So on that front, Saban's right. We should look past just record. Tom Fornelli and I were going back and forth yesterday about this. We shouldn't just look at record, because this is not pro sports. There is such a gap between your strength of schedule and my strength of schedule that if I play 7 top 25 teams and you play 2, and we both have a 10-1 record or 11-1 record, or you're 11-1 and I'm 10-2, doesn't automatically mean you're better than me. We got to look a little bit deeper than that.
Yeah, but Josh, that's not going to be how it's going to be. They're going to say, oh, well, this team is 11-1 and this team's 10-2. And even though their schedule's 1,000 times harder, well, they only had the one loss, and, records count. You are what your record is.
Or else a robot could decide all this. I don't want to give anyone any ideas. So that has been part of my argument. And the part of my argument when it comes to Vegas has been there is a central role that odds makers could play in the playoff selection process. But it shouldn't be to tell the committee who would be favored against who. Vegas's role should be providing the committee with a real strength of schedule. See, right now, if you're 8-4 and I play you, I probably don't get credit for a good win because you're probably not ranked in the top 25. And therefore, when the committee looks, you don't count as a top 25 win for me. But what if your 4 losses came against top 10 teams? Well, theoretically, you could be the 11th best team in the country and be 8-4. Again, that's an extreme example, but theoretically that could be the case. Well, Vegas doesn't get fooled by that stuff. Vegas understands and takes that into account. Therefore, they probably have you more accurately rated than the AP does. And so all I've ever asked for is to use the Vegas power rating system not to determine who's in the playoff, but to determine how strong a schedule actually has been. That's all I want Vegas to be involved with.
I got news for Josh Pate. It's not going to be done that way. They're going to look at your record. That's what they're going to primarily go by. We've seen that for years and years and years. Again, come 2024, it's not going to be near the issue. Yeah, there'll be a couple of teams that'll be mad and angry that they didn't get in the top 12, but so be it. That's not that big a deal. But when you're only taking 4, that's a totally different thing. One of the great things about the playoff, if you've watched the College World Series, that has been super exciting. Our team got beat, unfortunately. And some of our Vols fans said that LSU's strike zone was this. Yeah, right there. But look, we got beat 5-0. So, I'm not going to blame it on that. But anyway, I thought that was pretty interesting. Now, normally, I don't agree with Nick Saban because he's against NIL, which I kind of think is okay. I've been all right with it because a lot of these players need the money. And he's been against the transfer portal, which, again, I don't like guys sitting on the bench or being stuck at a place where they're not going to get to play. But, that's my opinion. I could be, a little bit off on that one too. But when he starts complaining about having to play LSU, Tennessee, and Auburn, when he's pretty much dominated those 3 teams for the last 15 years for the most part, that's a bit rich. And then mad because Josh Heupel goes fast when he's won 14 out of 15 years or whatever, and Josh Heupel shows up and actually gives him a game and we actually win. It's just, that's whining and complaining is what that is. Change the rules for me. That's a bit much. But on this one point, yeah, look, the SEC's a bit on the bad end of this because we beat each other up. The SEC's the best conference in the country. There's no doubt about it. So we beat each other up. That's why I don't think there's going to be a 9-game schedule. The more I've thought about this, the more I realize that Saban may be correct. We might have to just stick with the 8, play some Power 5 teams on top of that, and just let the chips fall where they may. These other teams in these crappy conferences that play 9 games, whoopity-doo. Who cares? You don't play anybody. So anyway, that's just my opinion. And Josh Pate's a good guy. He actually does a good job, but he's so old school. He's so old-fashioned. He's the get-off-my-lawn guy, just who he is. Anyway, if you like this content, be sure to hit that like button. Let's me know to continue to cover the Vols and the SEC and all our opponents. Anyway, if you've not subscribed, it's on your right, my left. Just boop, hit that little button. I would appreciate it. And right over here's my most recent video, and YouTube thinks you'll love it. We'll see you next time on Sports Talk Jay.